back a few years because, of course, in 2015, Turkey shot down an Su-24M in its airspace when there was a violation by Russia over the border from Syria, when Russia had gone all in with supporting Assad at that time. Now, of course, one of the things which the Ukraine war has shown us is that Russia's power is not ubiquitous. That's why they couldn't support Assad in the final denouement and were left to be seen to be a paper tiger, the phrase which Trump used last week. But I think what's interesting on that is that although the Turks shot down a Russian aircraft, there had been a series of violations in October 2015 by the Russians, of which on the third time the Turks called in the Russian ambassador. What I might expect to see, because we've now had incursions recently into Romania, potentially Denmark, although Russia was not named, alongside Estonian airspace, is you might see a coordinated diplomatic move in NATO to call in the Russian ambassador in those sovereign countries, so that you've got that coordinated action. And I think the other two things which we've seen are one of the things that Putin is seeking to do by this is to stress test NATO and to see what their collective will is. The first thing you'd say is that having stood up NATO very quickly after the Poland operation, an operation called Operation Eastern Sentry, which is both more aircraft, more surveillance, more radars, and more ground-based air defence, that is a positive thing, quickly done. And this week we've got significant EU meetings in Denmark, and Denmark is also going to receive troops before that meeting on Thursday, I think, both from Germany, France, and Sweden. That's radar, anti-drone capabilities. So I think everything that Putin tries to do seems to go against him. So at the moment, looking at the collective will of NATO, the thing he's trying to break, it only seems to make it stronger. There are interesting peripherals on this of all the countries involved. So, for example, the incursion into Estonian airspace. Estonia don't have any of their own fast fighter jets, so they rely on forward deployed NATO capability. Therefore, the decision to engage in Estonian airspace would be for NATO to take, in the way that it wasn't, for example, in Turkey, where airspace is sovereign in peacetime under the Chicago Convention, but Turkey took its own sovereign decision to shoot down a Russian aircraft, but was supported by NATO very, very quickly, in the same way that Poland, Denmark, Romania have also been supported very, very quickly. So I think at the moment, I would say that the plus side of the ledger is with NATO, how they've reacted, not with Russia, which looks to be in the minus category on the ledger.
And as part of these supposed Russian incursions, Kiev is claiming that Moscow is now launching drones from Shadow Fleet tankers. Obviously, we've seen operations like that, Operation Spiderweb, before, where where drones were launched from trucks. How seriously do you think commanders in Europe are going to be taking that threat, the idea that Russia could bring in a weapon system like a drone using a tanker?
Well, I think they should. It's really to do with either Schengen or the open borders and what level of checking you have and how your intelligence goes. So I don't think there should be any complacency on this. I think what's interesting on the Denmark side is that there's actually a air defence surveillance frigate going to surveil Danish airspace. So one of the potential things that happened was a Russian ship launching drones. That would be picked up, it seems to me, by the German capability. I think it's the FSG Hamburg is the platform which the Germans have put to secure that part of the Danish airspace for the duration of this week at least.
And how should Europe be going about countering drones? I mean, we're now hearing that Ukrainian soldiers could end up training Polish soldiers on how to, shoot down drones using interceptor drones and things like that. Is Ukraine now, because of its experience in this conflict, one of the only European countries that has a real and tested anti-drone system, rather than having to rely on more traditional things like very expensive jets?
Well, the speed of innovation is the thing we've been looking at the last few years, and it's where the speed of innovation comes from both the Ukrainian side and actually from the civil sector, which has been supporting Ukraine and how that's been working. So, from a UK perspective, for example, we've had the UK task force Kindred, which has been providing the bulk of our support via the Ramstein format to coordinate the support to them. But we had this thing announced a few weeks ago, Project Octopus from the Brits, which is a sort of anti-drone capability to drone hunt in terms of the Shaheeds. But one of the things we're also seeing is the commercialization of the battle space. So, for example, one of the capabilities given to the Ukrainians is under a program called White Stork being the Ukrainian national bird. That has been a program which was actually stood up via Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, who's looking at using AI incorporated into anti-drone technology to hunt Shaheeds. So it's not just the fact that it's Ukraine doing this; they are being given pretty decent capability. But like all these things, the people who operate them in a combat situation are probably the people to go through to train other people. They have the realities of this on a day-to-day basis in the way that the armies of the West, who obviously aren't fighting because deterrence still works at the moment, don't have that sort of qualitative and quantitative data that people on the ground do.
And to bring this back to Ukraine and the battle on the front, Chip, I'm keen to discuss Ukraine's adoption of the core system from its older brigade system. And I'd like to discuss a couple of specific examples of where the core system seems to have had some successes. The Times' Maxim Tucker wrote an article late last week about how 1st Azov Corps was able to encircle a Russian attack north of Pokrovsk when it got ahead of its support forces of artillery and drones. There are 3,000 Russian casualties there, hundreds of Russian troops now encircled and cut off from the rest of the Russian army. That's a sort of warfare that Maxim certainly described as us not really having seen since the start of this war, when we saw those quite significant retaking of land from Russia. How crucial is that kind of operation and that mobility in a war like this?
Well, I think firstly we have to look at organisational structures and then functions. So, in UK terms and NATO terms, as a corps is a certain size. So you would have battalions, brigades, divisions, and corps. Corps being a number of divisions which have capabilities to fight just both a close battle next 24 hours and a deep battle that out to 72 hours. It's different in size terms in the Ukrainians. So a corps would be really the sort of size of a brigade, but you'd expect it to have all arms capabilities. Now that also is changing in terms of the sort of sword versus shield. And it's both the drones and deep range fires, artillery, working together with air defense above that and electronic warfare. But the key thing is not really the platforms you have to fight in an all arms way, it's the method of fighting. So the fact that they're not going for attritional head on warfare against the Russians, but using the sort of little heart philosophy of, encirclement, break things up into small groups. It is that which psychologically unhinges the enemy. It's the equivalent of the British mission command and maneuver warfare, telling someone what to do, not how to do it, and they'll always surprise you with their ingenuity. It's trying to find a flank and exploit that. It is not head-on warfare.
You've been watching or listening to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Louis Sykes. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for a membership, or you can hear all the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it at thetimes.com. And remember, we are in both podcast and video form. You can find us on your favourite podcast platform. It's Times Radio's Frontline, or you can watch us on Times Radio's YouTube channel. Thanks very much. Goodbye.